All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling one of the most foundational, but honestly one of the most misunderstood texts in spiritual philosophy, Allan Kardec's The Book of Mediums. Now, I want you to forget everything you think you know about seances and spooky ghosts. We're going to break down the real core ideas of this incredible 19th century guide, all based directly on what's in the book itself.
So, let's start with the image that kicked this whole thing off, the spinning table. You know, back in the mid-1800s, this was basically a parlor game, a cool trick to show your friends. But for the people who would become the first spiritists, it was so much more. As the book itself says, this one simple physical thing, it was the launchpad for an entire philosophy. It was the effect that made them all stop and ask, wait a minute, what's the cause?
And that one simple question leads us straight into our first section, because this whole movement, it grew way beyond just making furniture dance around the room. Yeah, the focus shifted completely from the what to the why. I mean, it's one thing to see a table move on its own. It's another thing entirely when that table starts tapping out intelligent answers to your questions. That was the moment it stopped being just a weird phenomenon and started becoming a doctrine. It became clear this wasn't just random energy. There was an intelligence behind it.
And this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? If some unseen intelligence is interacting with our world, are we talking about miracles? Are we dealing with something that just breaks all the known laws of nature? This is exactly the big objection that the Book of Mediums sets out to answer.
And here is the doctrine's boldest claim. The answer is no. Absolutely not. None of this is supernatural. Instead, it argues these are just the effects of natural laws that we haven't figured out yet. You know, just like we once thought lightning was some divine miracle before we understood electricity. Spiritism frames all of these spiritual interactions as a part of the natural universe, just waiting for us to study and understand them.
Okay, so if it's all natural, there has to be a mechanism, right? I mean, how can something non-physical interact with something totally physical? This brings us to a really core concept of the whole doctrine. This was the fundamental problem, the logical roadblock. Critics were basically saying, look, an immaterial soul can't exert force on a solid object. It just doesn't make sense. For the whole theory to work, it desperately needed some kind of bridge to connect the spiritual world with our material one. And here is that bridge, the perispirit. The book defines this as a kind of semi-material, fluid-like body that surrounds the spirit. So it's not pure matter, but it's not pure spirit either. It's an intermediary, a go-between, that has properties of both. You can almost think of it as the spiritual version of a nervous system, translating the will of the spirit into actual action. This really illustrates it perfectly. The perispirit is the connector. While a spirit isn't a physical body, it links them together. But after death, the spirit keeps this semi-material envelope. And it's through the perispirit that a discarnate spirit can then interact with our world, by sort of blending its own fluidic body with that of a medium. So now that we have this bridge, let's look at all the different ways spirits are said to communicate, because believe me, it is not just about moving tables. The book basically breaks these phenomena into two big categories. First, you have the physical manifestations. This is the tangible stuff you can see or hear, raps on a wall, objects flying across a room, or even writing that just appears on paper. Then you have the intelligent manifestations, which are much more direct forms of communication, like having visions, a medium speaking words that are clearly not their own, or even just getting a sudden, powerful idea that feels like it came from outside yourself. Now this quote, this is one of the book's most radical ideas. It completely changes what most of us think a medium is. It's not some super rare, mystical gift for a select few. According to this text, if you can feel the influence of spirits, even just a tiny bit, then you are, technically, a medium. It's framed as a natural human ability, something we all have, that's just stronger in some people than in others. And since it's a natural faculty, it shows up in all sorts of ways. The book talks about a huge variety of these abilities. Some people are better at the physical stuff, moving objects. Others might hear spirit voices. Some can see them, and some can even act as a channel for healing energies. It's a whole spectrum of abilities, not just one single skill. Okay, this brings us to an absolutely critical part of the doctrine. If communication is possible, then you have to ask, who exactly are we talking to? The book is extremely clear that you have to learn to be discerning. The logic here is actually pretty simple. Dying doesn't magically make you a saint or a genius. Spirits are just the souls of people who used to live here, and they take their personalities, their knowledge, and their morals with them. So the spirit world is just as diverse as our world.
You've got wise, kind spirits, but you've also got ignorant ones, pranksters, and some who are just plain malicious.
So how do you tell them apart? Well, the book gives you a very clear checklist. Communications from higher-level spirits are always marked by their high moral quality. Their language is dignified and to the point. The message always promotes goodness, charity, and love. The advice is rational, it's consistent, and above all, it's uplifting.
And on the flip side, there are some major red flags for inferior spirits. Their language might be silly or vulgar or just full of contradictions. They often love to flatter the ego, encouraging pride in the medium. They'll use famous names to make themselves sound important. They'll suggest ridiculous things, and in the end, their own lack of moral character always shines through.
This all leads to our final and maybe most important section. Why do this at all? What's the point? The book gives a very specific purpose for all of this, but it also warns of some very, very real dangers. And this really gets to the heart of it. For Spiritism, mediumship is not a party trick. It's not for predicting lottery numbers or finding lost keys. The sole purpose, according to the doctrine, is for our own growth. It's supposed to be a tool to prove that the soul survives death, to learn about the universe, and ultimately to help us become better, more moral people.
But, and this is a huge but, the book warns about the serious risks if this is taken lightly. It actually details 3 escalating degrees of spiritual obsession. It can start with simple obsession, where a spirit is just annoying, constantly pestering, but it can get worse, escalating to fascination, where the spirit literally clouds the medium's mind, making them totally unable to see that they are being deceived. And the most severe stage is subjugation, where a spirit can actually dominate the medium's will and control their actions and even their body.
So after all of that, from spinning tables to the very nature of the spirit world, we're left with this final thought. The Book of Mediums was this massive attempt to take what seemed like miracles and put them into the framework of natural law. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Almost 200 years later, as we're exploring the very edges of consciousness and physics, what things today do we call supernatural, just because we haven't discovered the science behind them yet?